You've probably thought that your life will never change, that old wounds will forever remain unhealed. But what if you dared to believe in second chances, in unexpected opportunities, and in love that can heal every scar? This is the story of Emily, a single mother, and Charles, a man who once abandoned his son. Their journey will make you reconsider how life always finds a way to bring us back to what truly matters. Join them on a journey filled with surprises, hope, and healing, to discover whether love is truly the greatest power we can possess. Emily Carter, the single mother, stood at the door of her home, her hands trembling as she held a slice of bread spread with peanut butter for the breakfast of her twin daughters. In her heart, worry had become her closest companion, lingering with her every day. Her rent was 3 months overdue, the fireplace barely worked, and the paycheck from her job at the diner, a check that had been returned, was now just a piece of paper with no value. Yet, despite it all, when the knock at the door came, she knew it wasn't just another notice, or another warning. It was something much worse, something that would change everything. The door opened, and before her stood eyes she never thought she would see again. Brian's eyes. But not Brian, the man she once loved, the man who was now nothing more than a distant memory. These eyes, filled with guilt and coldness, belonged to a man nearly 30 years older than her, wearing a $1,000 suit, exuding power. Charles Mitchell, the man who had orchestrated the severing of ties with his son, who had disappeared from her life for years, was now standing in front of her. But this time, he wasn't the father who abandoned Brian. This time, he was the one threatening to take away the only home she and her daughters had left. Emily Carter. His voice was cold, like a verdict she couldn't contest. She nodded, trying to remain calm as a choking feeling rose within her. Eviction notice. You have 30 days to vacate Pine Hill Apartments. Any disputes must be directed to Mitchell Holdings. The door closed, and Emily's world shattered once again. No job. No savings. No backup plan. And now, no home. She stared at the manila envelope with the notice inside, her heart pounding in her ears. She could feel the panic beginning to creep into every corner of her soul. Sophie and Chloe, her twin daughters, entered from behind the door, their sleepy eyes filled with anxiety. They didn't know their safety was being threatened. Emily forced a smile, though it was thin and fragile. "Don't worry, girls," she said, struggling to keep the tremor out of her voice. "We're just going to have a little change of scenery soon." But deep down, she wasn't sure she could keep that promise. Not far away, in a shiny glass tower in the heart of downtown Chicago, Charles Mitchell sat at his desk, sipping his 4th espresso of the day. A 66-year-old man, his coldness had become legendary. He had built Mitchell Holdings into a real estate empire, and his efficiency was the stuff of corporate legends. But as he looked down at a particular document, his icy gaze faltered. The name of the tenant at Pine Hill Apartments was Emily Carter. But it wasn't the name that made him stop. It was the other name, the name of his son, Brian Mitchell. That name hit him like a punch to the gut, reminding him of the painful memories of a son he hadn't spoken to in years, a son he had lost through his own foolishness. Now, he was facing the possibility of evicting his own grandchildren, children he never even knew existed. In less than an hour, Charles's black SUV sped through streets he had only seen in spreadsheets. When he arrived at Pine Hill Apartments, he stood in front of the dilapidated building, seeing the peeling paint, the broken windows, and the doorbell held together with tape. He took a deep breath, adjusted his cufflinks, and walked to the door, where Emily was waiting, not with anger, but with helplessness. And then, the door opened. Emily wasn't ready for the man standing there, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit with eyes that burned with authority. But it wasn't his power that made her freeze. It was his eyes. Brian's eyes. No, not Brian. But the eyes of Brian's father. The man she never thought she'd face again. "Emily Carter," Charles said, his voice hoarse, as though he was delivering a final sentence. "I'm Charles Mitchell." Not a question. A verdict. As Charles stepped inside, Sophie and Chloe stood in the hallway, their innocent eyes wide with curiosity. "Are you our grandfather?" Sophie asked, her voice ringing out like a bell in the quiet space. Her innocent question felt like a knife piercing Charles's heart. He turned to look at Emily, and she slowly nodded, confirming what he never thought would happen. "Yes," she said, "these are Brian's daughters, and this is her twin sister." "Twin?" Charles whispered, his voice trembling. Chloe stepped forward from behind Sophie, holding her stuffed bunny tightly, and looked up at Charles with wide eyes. "You look just like the picture of Dad that Mom has," she whispered. Emily's heart ached, and her hands clenched into fists. She closed her eyes. "Be quiet," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "They're your blood, but you didn't know. You cut him out of your life." The silence hung heavy between the three of them, as thick as the storm clouds before a downpour. But for the first time, Charles Mitchell felt something unfamiliar inside him. A feeling he had never known, regret. And a kind of understanding he had never sought before. Why him? Why these children, his grandchildren, whom he never knew? The question echoed in Charles's mind as he stood there, speechless. Charles tried to say something, but then fell silent. For the first time in years of running Mitchell Holdings, the powerful man, with all his coldness and sternness that people thought would never falter, couldn't speak a word. The entire room seemed to freeze in that moment, and Emily, the strong but deeply troubled single mother, just waited, hoping for an answer. She looked at Charles, her eyes cold, as though waiting for an explanation that might never come. "Would it change anything if you did that?" Emily asked, her voice lowering, heavy like a stone. A bitter question, filled with the resentment she had kept buried for so long. "Did you send a birthday card, keep the phone on, and pick it up after he died?" The question lingered in the air like smoke, slowly spreading, making Charles Mitchell feel suffocated. The regret, that emotion he had kept locked away for years, surged so strongly that he didn't know how to face it. In response, all he could manage to say was stiffly, "I came to reverse the eviction notice. The company made a mistake." Emily just let out a dry laugh. A laugh without joy, just the weariness of a woman who had fought too long with life. "A mistake? It's not a mistake, Charles. It's policy. Policy is always policy, until it happens to you." She didn't need to say more because everything that needed to be said was already conveyed through those words. It was him, Charles Mitchell, who had pushed everything out of his grasp, and now, he had to face a truth he couldn't avoid. From the hallway, Sophie's innocent voice echoed, "Mom, is he staying for dinner?" That simple question hit Charles's conscience like a heavy blow. The girls, with their innocent eyes and pure hope, knew nothing about the past, nothing about the pain he had caused. They only saw a man who looked like the father, the grandfather they always wished they had in their lives. And for the first time in his life, Charles Mitchell didn't know what to say. He stood there, hesitating, as though every word had gotten caught in his throat. Emily didn't sleep that night. She sat quietly at the kitchen table, her eyes fixed on the eviction notice that still hadn't been touched. The small apartment was quiet, like a tomb, but her mind wouldn't be still. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the image of Charles Mitchell standing at the door, his perfectly tailored suit, the shock when he saw the girls, and the strange, undeniable look of regret in his eyes. A part of her wanted to slam the door in his face and never see him again. But another part of her, the part she hated to admit existed, remembered the way the girls looked at Charles, as if they saw a missing piece of their life. And she feared, not Charles, but the hope. The hope that could be sparked by a man she had once despised. The next morning, Emily dragged herself to the community center to print out job applications. Each step felt heavy, as though she were carrying the world on her shoulders. When she returned home, she noticed a sleek black car parked outside her building. Her stomach twisted. She knew immediately, though she didn't want to admit it, that Charles was there. He was waiting for her at the bottom of the stairs, like a ghost she couldn't shake off. She said nothing, just walked past him, trying not to let her eyes meet his. But this time, Charles didn't let her go. "I'd like to offer you a job," he said, his voice cold but also steady. Emily turned back, narrowing her eyes in disbelief, as though she couldn't trust what she was hearing. "Sorry, I run Mitchell Holdings. I have hundreds of employees. I can offer you an administrative position, flexible hours, full benefits." She let out a dry, bitter laugh. "And this is my redemption ship?" she wondered. But Charles just gently shook his head. "No, it's not redemption. It's responsibility. I can't change what happened with Brian, but now I can help." Arms crossed. "Anything to argue? It's a real position. Report to the manager, not me. No special treatment. But if you accept, I want the girls to have what they deserve: stable housing, a safer environment, somewhere they can sleep without mice in the walls." Emily hesitated. Her pride screamed no. But the images of Chloe coughing at night, Sophie crying because the milk in the fridge had gone sour, those images screamed louder in her mind. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice softer, as if there was no other option. 2 days later, Emily walked into Mitchell Tower for the first time. Marble floors, sleek glass elevators, and a quiet that came from people with too much power and not enough time. She felt like a grain of sand in an ocean, small and insignificant. She almost turned around, but then thought of the twins sitting with Mrs. Parker, wondering if tonight would be the night their lights would be turned off forever. She decided to continue, for the sake of her daughters. Julia Edwards, the woman standing in the lobby, greeted her and showed her the way. Her new supervisor, Jack Harrison, introduced himself with a firm handshake and a friendly smile. "Welcome to Mitchell Holdings. You'll be supporting property records. Nothing too flashy, but it's an important job." The day passed in a blur of passwords, forms, and procedures. Her head was spinning, but for the first time in months, she felt something unfamiliar, control. She could control her life, and that was something she hadn't had in a long time. That evening, as Emily was about to leave the office, she saw a figure waiting at the entrance. Charles Mitchell. The man she never wanted to see again, standing there like a ghost from the past. She raised an eyebrow, wondering what would happen next. To her surprise, he wasn't standing there alone, there was also a driver. A luxury car parked right in front of the door. She looked at Charles, his eyes cold and sharp, but then he gave a slight smile, calmly responding. "It's not a driver, just a ride if you'd like." For reasons she couldn't explain, maybe because she didn't want to refuse any longer, she nodded. Just a little hesitation, just a bit of patience from him, and she agreed to go along. The car started, and silence filled the space. The lights of Chicago reflected on the windows, each streetlight seeming like a streak of light cutting through her mind. The darkness outside was thick, but inside her, the unanswered questions filled her thoughts. After a long while, Charles broke the silence. "How are the girls adjusting?" he asked, his voice low and somewhat harsh, yet filled with care. Emily tried to read him, attempting to decipher his casual questions. "They think you're Santa Claus in a suit," she replied, a faint smile briefly crossing her lips, though it wasn't a joyful one. Charles gave a weak smile. "And you," he said, "I think you're still trying to buy forgiveness." Emily turned to look at him, her gaze colder than ever. "No," she replied softly. "You're trying to earn trust." Her voice was still like ice, but inside, emotions were swirling. She couldn't ignore the sarcasm in his words, but she couldn't deny that something in him had changed. Weeks passed like a dream, but it was a dream full of conflicting emotions that Emily didn't want to wake from. Her paycheck was paid on time. Mrs. Parker, who took care of the girls, continued to watch over them while she worked. And something Emily never expected happened. Charles started visiting every Sunday. He never came by invitation, but he was always silent, bringing along small books for the girls, art supplies, and even an old bicycle with a new pink bell for Sophie. At first, Emily remained cautious, always keeping her distance. But one evening, as she looked out from the kitchen, she saw Charles bending down, helping Chloe fix the wheel of a broken toy. The scene caught her off guard, and she felt something in him that she hadn't expected. It was tenderness, something she never thought Charles, the resolute and cold man, could possess. She wasn't ready to lower her guard yet, but deep down, she couldn't deny that something had changed. A few days later, Charles suggested they look at a new apartment at Sunset Ridge Estates, one of his properties that had recently been vacated. At first, Emily's response was to decline immediately. But when she saw the spacious, clean space with 2 bedrooms and a nearby playground, what made her change her mind was the affordable price, especially through the company's employee housing program. She couldn't stop thinking about the future of the girls. She looked at Charles, her confusion still evident. "Why are you really doing all of this?" she asked one evening as they stood on the balcony of the new apartment, overlooking a quiet street. "Because I missed the chance with Brian," Charles said, his voice almost a whisper. "And I don't want to miss the chance with them." Emily looked out at the streetlights, feeling the tension in her chest ease a little. Charles's words hit her like a soft blow to her heart, making her reflect. But just when she thought everything was settled, something unexpected happened. Sophie came home from school, holding a drawing. "This is for Grandpa," she proudly said, holding up the picture of their family. The simple drawing made Emily's heart tighten. 4 stick figures, 2 girls, a woman, and an old man wearing a tie. Emily felt her heart tighten, unable to speak. She wasn't sure whether it was joy or fear, maybe both. But that feeling, deep inside her, was undeniable. She looked at the drawing, her heart sinking, not because of the girl's innocence, but because of something from the past she wasn't ready to face. She watched the girls sleeping in their beds, something they had never done before, and it felt like something had shifted. The apartment was quiet, the fridge full, but she couldn't shake the thought. How long will this last? So, she picked up her phone and sent Charles a question she never thought she would ask. "What happens if I change my mind?" Just a few seconds later, he replied immediately. "I won't change mine." Emily read the message again, and in her heart, she knew one thing too well: life has a way of proving people wrong. She didn't know if she could forgive Charles, a man who had abandoned his son, and now wanted to step into their lives. Saturday morning brought an unexpected peace. The Chicago sky was gentle with late spring light, and Emily stood in the kitchen, preparing pancakes. This time, they were real pancakes, not just peanut butter on toast. Sophie and Chloe were dancing barefoot in the living room, singing a song they made up about strawberries and bicycles. And Charles Mitchell, the man who was once nothing more than a bitter memory, was arriving with something he said could be important. But Emily wasn't sure what to expect. Charles had gradually become a presence in their lives. Still formal, still cautious in some ways, but now, he was truly present. He picked the girls up from school once a week, brought groceries without asking, and even sat on the floor last Sunday, helping Sophie glitter a birthday card for her classmate. He had tried, and hadn't given up. One day, there was a knock on the door. This time, it wasn't the sound of doom. Emily opened the door and saw Charles holding a guitar case and a small envelope. "It's from Brian," he said, nodding toward the case. "He left it in storage, I've restored it." Emily felt something catch in her throat. She stepped aside silently to let him in. The twins immediately spotted the guitar and ran over. "Is it a gift?" Chloe asked, eyes wide. "Is it from our dad?" Emily gently replied. "Your dad used to play it when you were both babies." Sophie looked up, her eyes bright. "Can we learn to play it?" "If your mom says it's okay," Charles replied, his voice softer than usual. Emily nodded slightly. "Yes, but one of you has to promise not to put stickers on it." The girls giggled and pulled the guitar into their room to make it a throne for their stuffed animals. Charles handed Emily the envelope. I've set up 2 modest education funds, enough for them to go to college. This isn't a bribe. It's not about control. It's just what a grandfather should have done from the start. Emily slowly opened the envelope, her eyes scanning the official documents. Her hands trembled, but this time, not out of fear. I don't know who you're trying to become, she said. But no matter who you are, they need this. Charles nodded. I do too. The next weekend, the whole family decided to take their first trip together to the lake house that Charles had recently bought, a house that wasn't as lavish or grand as what most people might imagine for a powerful man like him. This house didn't have the cold marble floors or pristine white furniture like the luxury apartment in the city where Charles lived. No, this house had warm wooden floors, a large fireplace full of crackling fire, and wildflowers blooming around the porch, inviting everyone to come and experience the peacefulness. The surroundings were very different from their usual life. The girls, Sophie and Chloe, ran across the grass, screaming with delight as they chased dragonflies flitting through the air. Emily stood on the porch, sipping a warm cup of tea, her eyes watching them play in the summer sunlight. An overwhelming sense of peace blanketed the whole space. Charles stood beside her, silently, but his eyes never left the scene unfolding before them. After a moment of silence, he spoke. She looks like him, he said, pointing toward Chloe. Same eyes, same way of thinking before she speaks. Emily turned to look at him, saying nothing, but there was a strange feeling inside her. Her little girl's eyes had made Charles see a part of the past that he had missed. Sophie has his musical soul, Emily added, a small smile gently appearing as she recalled the times Sophie would sing to herself when she was scared. Charles closed his eyes, quietly, then said softly. I used to think success meant skyscrapers, my name etched in glass and steel. He paused, a reflective stillness hanging in the air as if he was revisiting the past. It turns out, it's a little more complicated than that. Emily felt the change in his voice, the gentleness, though it was subtle, but clearly, something had shifted in him. She didn't know what to say, but the feeling inside her was healing, even if only a small part. The silence between them lingered, but it didn't feel like the cold silence they had known before. It felt like a breeze blowing gently through the walls that had been built for so long. It wasn't unfamiliar, it was a sign that change was slowly coming. Months passed, and the apartment Emily once feared losing had become a true home, a place where she could feel safe. Her job at Mitchell Holdings was growing. Ethan, her manager, began assigning her more complex projects, and one afternoon, he leaned over her desk and said, Emily, you're not just a good employee, you're one of the best things to happen to this company in years. Emily smiled but didn't respond. A part of her still couldn't accept these compliments without doubting them. She had learned to live in suspicion, through years of loneliness and hardship. But then, on the day the twins turned 7, Charles showed up with 2 brand new bicycles and a small box of pastries from their favorite bakery. He stayed for the entire party, sitting on the floor playing board games, letting Sophie glitter a small heart on his cheek with purple glitter. That evening, after everyone had left, Emily saw him sitting alone on the couch, his tie loosened, his hands tightly clasped together. He looked at her with a soft gaze, but also one filled with deep thought. I have a question, he said, his voice low, like an invitation to open up a part of the past they both weren't ready to face. Emily raised an eyebrow. Is it about the glitter? She joked lightly, but there was still a hint of worry in her tone. Because no, it's not coming off my face. Charles tried to laugh softly. Then he looked into her eyes and said, I want to ask if I can legally become their guardian. Not to take them away, not to change anything. Just to be fully in their lives. So they never have to wonder who will show up. Charles's words hit Emily's heart like a wave crashing, bringing emotions she hadn't expected. She didn't say anything, just stared at him, trying to process everything he had just said. For a long moment, she couldn't find the words to respond. Finally, she exhaled softly. I'll think about it, she whispered. And she did. For days, she watched how he showed up in their lives, not just with gifts but with his time, with his presence. Charles had changed. He was no longer the cold man she had first met. Now, he was a man who truly cared, who had accepted and loved her daughters. Emily remembered the man who had stood at her door months ago, cold, distant, and full of his own guilt, compared to the man now reading bedtime stories and holding her daughter's hands as they crossed the street. A week later, Emily called Charles. "Okay," she said, her voice calm but determined. "You can be their grandfather. Not on paper, not by title, but truly." A few days later, she found a framed photo of Brian on the table, with a handwritten note from Charles. He would be so proud. Now, every Sunday, they gathered at the lake house for family dinners. Emily cooked. The twins drew chalk art on the dock. And Charles, the man who once measured love by profit, now sat at the head of the table, his voice filled with laughter, his gaze soft and warm. Some journeys don't begin with love. They begin with loss. But if you keep moving forward, even through the hardest chapters, sometimes you'll find your way back home. What about you? Do you believe in second chances? Can people really change? If this story touched your heart, leave us a 100 in the comments and let us know where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe, share this video with someone who might need a little hope.